10
All
o'clock.
right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Omar Ayash. I am the president of the World Trade Center here in Kentucky. I would like to welcome you to our trade chat. We're very excited to have this event here, and I think we've got a great panel that will share insight on what's going on in Ukraine from a business perspective, particularly, and we have some surprise guests at the end of the panel to share some insight on unique things happening here. If you don't mind, if you're not speaking, please mute your mic. There will be time at the end of the session for Q&A, so you will have that chance. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to my board member, Robert Brown, to moderate this wonderful panel. Thank you.
And as you saw from the message that we sent out, so much of the news on the Ukraine is by commentators sitting in their nice offices at in their workplace or at home talking about the crisis situation, frequently it's reporters who are writing stories. But what we wanted to do is get engaged and hear the comments of people who are living in the Ukraine or have lived in the Ukraine and can tell us what life is really like. Because that's what really matters. It's not just numbers, it's the human beings and the impact on the human beings. So we're going to have four speakers. The first one is Andy Hunder. He's the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in the Ukraine, representing more than 600 U.S. and international investors and corporate members. He's originally from London, but he was a presenter on TV on a number of leading Ukrainian television stations and has been involved in public relations and also external affairs, etc. My favorite part about his presentations, he's spoken to the House of Lords, House of Commons, and Oxford University, LSE, etc. So he also served as the treasurer of AmChams in Europe, so he can put the perspective in, not just the impact. So Andy, please give us, sir, the business perspective. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Omar. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody who's on this side of the Atlantic. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Um, 5 weeks ago, literally 5 weeks ago, on the 24th of February, I woke up in my apartment in Kiev, in downtown Kiev, and around 4:30 in the morning, we heard the first bombs going off and the news that the Russian army had invaded Kiev, had invaded Ukraine. This was something that we were being told by US intelligence sort of weeks and months ahead. They pretty much got everything right. I think it was a good lesson to learn, how exact the US intelligence on this was. So we had the car ready for the last 3 weeks before that date. I had a full tank of fuel. I had 2 jerry cans in the boot. I had paper maps. I had cash in hand, both local currency, and hard currency. And my son and I, we got into the car and we started heading out of Kiev. We got caught up in gridlock almost immediately because at that moment, thousands and then eventually hundreds of thousands, and now about 4 million people have left the country, and around a total of about 10 million now are internally sort of have either left the country or are internally displaced. So this is the biggest migration of human migration since World War II. I think what we have seen, really, we as the AmCham in Ukraine, we are the biggest AmCham in all of Europe. We have a full-time staff of 45 members, and at the moment, out of our team, 16 are in the European Union, 20 are internally displaced, mainly in Western Ukraine, that have come out of Kiev, and 9 are in Kiev still. Mainly are male staff, because males age 16 to sorry, 18 to 60 aren't allowed to leave the country. They have to stay and defend the community, the town, the city, the country. So as we were leaving, as we were fleeing the massive traffic jams, we immediately saw queues for the cash point machines, the ATMs, the petrol stations, and a road to Western Ukraine to a city, Lviv, which usually takes about 6-7 hours. For some, it took 4 days. We were lucky because we managed to stop off in a number of cities along the way. We had friends that put us up, and then we came to Lviv, and that's where we set up a base for a while. We had one of our member companies who had just opened a brand new hotel. Still, it wasn't even actually officially open, but the good news was it had a basement with Wi-Fi and with hot water for coffee and tea, because at that time we were already being sent down to the basement regularly with air raid sirens, because the Russian army started bombing, shelling large parts of Ukraine, including cities in Western Ukraine that we thought were safe. Even last Saturday, there was quite a serious shelling of a petrol, oil and petrol deposits storage in Lviv. So after that, we decided and we moved further west. We crossed the border to Slovakia in Košice, where AmCham has an office, and that's where we set up base. I'm currently in London at the moment, but we have the team across Europe, and still the majority of the team is in Western Ukraine. So we are continuing to operate. I think in terms of our team, our key priorities were some of our individuals. One of our individuals, she is currently 8 months pregnant, and it was giving her, making sure that she managed to find a place where to give birth. She wasn't allowed to move with her husband. We had other stories, unfortunately, some very sad stories. We had one of our member companies' employees, a very large US company who is in agriculture trading, and their employee who was pregnant, she unfortunately she lost the baby, and she had to cross into Moldova to go to surgery. Luckily, we have a network of AmChams across Europe that have been very, very good to us. But again, our members, we still get the calls telling us the horrific stories of the murder. One member called us, and there was a husband and a wife and 2 children in the car. They were leaving the town of Irpin, which is northwest of Kiev, and in the roadblock, the Russian soldier just shot the father in the head in front of his wife and 2 children. So that's the horrors, we are seeing in 21st century Europe. This is what is happening, and the stories that we are seeing, and the appalling, genocide that's taking place by Russia's army in Ukraine. For us, I think it is, again, the number one priority is to stop the killing, because it continues. I think we saw the talks in Istanbul yesterday. We are in touch with many of the key negotiators. Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Oleksiy Reznikov. Some of you actually may know him. He is one of the top litigators in the country. I used to work with him. He has a reputation of being a top lawyer, and now he is the Minister of Defense, leading an army that is being challenged by the second largest army in the world, and he's doing a phenomenal job in his leadership. So I think the lawyers are really showing sort of amazing leadership, and we do see many others, including the head of the president's office. Many of them are lawyers. I don't know, maybe within the ABA or other lawyers association, you may have come across them, but it is really interesting to see that lawyers are really at the forefront and leading a nation at war. So I think that's an interesting observation. I think historians will study that in future in much detail. I think a number of focus areas I would like to point to at the moment. Number one is obviously the humanitarian drive. There are cities that have been totally devastated. You may have seen what happened in Mariupol. We're seeing cities like Mykolaiv now. Also a very charismatic mayor there. Luckily he overslept yesterday, and as he was still due to the fact he overslept, as he overslept, the city administration was bombed, and a massive bomb went straight through the city administration. Luckily he's alive. We saw the talks in Istanbul yesterday, and talks that Russians are saying they're going to pull back from cities of Kiev and Chernihiv. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that. We saw continued bombing of Chernihiv last night. One of our employees, she's on the phone every day with her mum and dad who are in Chernihiv, and that's also being flattened. So I think in terms of what the business community is looking at in the very, very short term, the immediate term, is the humanitarian aid, getting water, food, and medicine to those most at need. There has been a push to get food. We are in touch with our colleagues in Kiev every day. The food there is being delivered, but again, it's places like Mariupol that are having real challenges getting anything delivered. So I think it's supporting the humanitarian drive. So we're very grateful to all the corporations and all the companies that have supported financially this drive, because there is a massive need, with 4 million already having fled the country, and a total 4 plus another 6 that are internally displaced. So, these are people that have left their homes, many left with one bag. I was lucky, I managed to get a suitcase and a bag in the car. I have a bigger boot. But again, in moments like that, you do really think, as you pack, you have like 10 minutes to pack your stuff. It's how much you need in life, and what are the important things that you take. And I think it's really sort of with so little time to make a decision what is important and what isn't. But I think it does show that in life, some of the things we think as material, as important, sometimes are very, very unimportant and are very insignificant. So I think number one, the humanitarian drive. Number two, probably really, it's keeping the economy going. Ukraine is a big agricultural economy. It's number one in the world for sunflower seed, number one in the world for sunflower oil. It's big in corn, it's big in grain, wheat, soya. Many countries across the world, especially some countries across Northern Africa, for example, Egypt or Southeast Asia, they are very much reliant on Ukrainian grain and Ukrainian sunflower oil, sunflower seed. So we are seeing, the number one issue now, again, for the agriculture sector is to have the sowing season in place. That starts from the seeds. We have a number of plants. We have a big Corteva plant in Poltava. Monsanto, just before the Bayer merger, they opened a big plant in Zhytomyr. It's about 2 hours west of Kiev. They have about 80% capacity they're still working at. So we do feel that the seed should be there, but then it's really the crop protection, the tractors, because having the technology to sow the harvest, and then again, to be able, without being shelled, to sow, to plant the fields, the vast fields of Ukraine, in terms of wheat, sunflower, and other crops. So that's something, we are very much looking at. Again, Ukraine is a big exporter of commodities, not only soft commodities, but commodities, especially in terms of steel, iron ore. This is quite significant. The challenge there is that the ports of Odessa, Mykolaiv are pretty much cut off, and there are Bosphorus was closed off the day before yesterday, because we are seeing that there have been mines set up by the Russians into the sea, which makes any commercial vessels extremely challenging and dangerous to navigate a sea which has mines in it. So I think for the economy, it's essential to have the ports open, to have Ukraine has access to Odessa, to the other ports, and really to keep that the focus. Because the other option, if you start exporting by rail, Ukraine does have a large railway network system, but Ukraine is on a wide gauge rail track. So that means that at the border with the EU, it goes into narrow gauge. For passenger terminals, it's possible to lift the actual rail cars and change the wheels. For anything more heavy, that becomes more and more difficult. So in terms of keeping the economy going, and exports is difficult. We've seen a number of factories that have been totally bombed. We have a big Mondelez. They are the former Crafts. They make the Oreo cookies, and they have a factory in a place called Trostanets, which was just liberated yesterday. But again, 600 employees that were being kept in a siege, but the factory now is still very much unoperational, and many other sort of sectors. So I think it's keeping the economy going. But probably two other areas in terms of legal, I think it's really now looking at the upcoming legal claims that will be put up against the Russian Federation once we have a ceasefire and an end to the war. Whether this will be starting with the ICC and war crimes and crimes against humanity, but also reparation claims for damage to business, damage to life, loss of life. I think the whole legal issue here will be that there'll be a massive focus for lawyers. Ukraine's general prosecutors, the Attorney General, is already establishing a team, collecting, giving people the opportunity to provide evidence of war crimes and of damages, of losses. And this is something that will probably take off quite immediately. It depends on which jurisdiction and which courts will actually then take this on. And then probably finally, it's already looking at the what happens after the war. In terms, if we look at Germany 45 and onwards, a Marshall Plan, a German Marshall Plan by the US. I mean, the damages already. I mean, we're looking at billions and billions that have been done in infrastructure and many other. So the bill is going to be colossal, and it's still ongoing. I mean, we're still seeing the storage of the fuel storage facilities being destroyed. Ukraine, 52% of all the electricity, so every second light bulb is powered by nuclear. Ukraine has 4 nuclear power stations. The head of the IAEA actually arrived in Ukraine yesterday. He's visiting these plants. Again, keeping those safe, because we have 2 that have been taken over by the Russians, and it's unclear what their objectives are by taking over the nuclear power stations. But so far, the electricity is running and the power's on. I think, the internet has been on, the mobile networks are up. Again, massive respect to the banking system. The banks have managed to keep the banking system up and running. Not only all kinds of online, but still they managed to deliver cash to the bank branches. And even though that more than half of their armored vehicles, the cash delivery vehicles, they're given to the military, but the banks have done an amazing job. Again, respect to the National Bank of Ukraine, who has changed legislation allowing the data centers to move from the territory of Ukraine either up into the cloud or outside of Ukraine. So that sort of allows the business continuity. So I think, we've seen some real amazing stories of humanity. There's a real sense of unity. People are helping each other. The international community is really reaching out. So I think, we are very grateful to you all for your support. Please do support your colleagues, the lawyers in Ukraine who are that there's been a massive loss of business to the legal community. So the partners are always, looking in terms of how they will rebuild their businesses. But I think for many now, that's not the main thing on their mind. The main thing is to support the people to win this war and then to rebuild this country altogether. So, Robert, I'll probably cut off there. I'd be happy to take any questions later, but if that's okay, I'll cut off there.
Fascinating, Andy, and so much of what you were talking about is information I had not seen or read or heard about. So these insights are fascinating. Now, next is Timur Bondaryev. I can honestly say that within the international legal community, Timur is the most prominent attorney in the Ukraine, and I say that sincerely. For instance, when I was chair of American Bar Association International Section, I led a trade mission to Ukraine. And the first person that I contacted was Timur, and he always delivers. And Timur, I know you're the vice chair of the ABA International Section's Eurasia Russia Committee. Just last week, we decided to change the name to the Eurasia Committee. So that's something that you had been asking for a long time. So Timur, I can't wait to hear what you're going to be talking about, sir.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, thank you. This is good news. Actually, I've heard already that there were discussions with regard to the renaming, and very relieved to hear that ABA has required Putin to invade Ukraine to finally rename the committee. Actually, anyway. So thank you again for your time, and pleasure to be here. So I'm just to start with, I'm talking with you from Lviv, from western part of Ukraine. It's the western capital of Ukraine. We have some, like informal capitals all over Ukraine. So Lviv is the western capital of Ukraine. Odessa is the southern capital of Ukraine. Kiev is a former capital of Ukraine, and Kharkiv, which has already been mentioned a couple of times today, which was almost flattened by Russians, is the eastern Ukrainian capital of Ukraine, very nice city, but apparently we will not see it anymore as we know it from the from previous times. It's interesting, by the way, that the cities which have always been considered by Russians and by Ukrainians and perceived as the, so to say, loyal to Russians and very Russian due to their ethnical origin or majority of people who speak Russian, like Kharkiv or Mariupol, they seem to have been exposed to Russian hospitality much more than any others. And if you look at again at Mariupol and Kharkiv, you would say that they're totally flattened. In Mariupol, the people are just, that there is nothing these days, no sewage, no water, no electricity, no connection, no internet, etc. The people will live in Mariupol, and apparently these days there are about 100,000 people left in the city, but the government has been insisting on evacuating them because the city has been under shellings, under bombings, and it's just unbelievable what you would see there. The people are getting buried just on the streets, in the yards of in the backyards of the residential buildings, because it's just unbelievable what's happening there. As Andy said already, we've seen unprecedented wave of migration these days. Based on the official statistics, there are 6+ million people, internally displaced people, who have been moving from eastern part of Ukraine or central part of Ukraine back to western part of Ukraine. And 3.5 million people have already left the country, and it looks like more people are still leaving. I had a very similar story as Andy had. Actually, I also left Kiev, apparently because I'm originally based in Kiev. Even though I was raised in eastern part of Ukraine. I'm ethnically Russian. Actually, in my family, we never spoke Ukrainian, but I feel very much Ukrainian anyway. But last years of my life I spent in Kiev, and so we also left Kiev here to western Ukraine. A bit later, so we spent in Kiev 4 days, but since we live in just one of the directions where the Russians were advancing, so to say, my wife and my kids, they couldn't stand actually all these bombings and shelling, etc., and we had to leave. We had a bit different situation. We were like it took us 17 hours to get to Lviv. So of uninterrupted drive normally takes like five hours to get there. What's just a little bit for you, just since we talk for American audience, just a little bit to give insights about the situation, about the geography. If you look at our map, you would see that we have 3,000+ kilometers of common border with Russia and Belarus, including Belarus, because when we talk about the hostilities, we have to also mention Belarus, because Belarus has been, even if Belarus is not officially in war with Ukraine yet, but Belarus was very generous in helping Russians to attack Ukraine and has provided its airports and its territory for attacking Ukraine. For instance, some rockets and missiles have reached here, western part of Ukraine, through Belarus territory. So we still expect Mr. Lukashenko to enter in war officially every day, but apparently he has been sort of afraid of his army leaving him, because his army seems to be the only shield for his regime, his unlawful regime. And some good friends of mine in Belarus are saying that if army leaves Belarus, then most probably they will overturn Lukashenko. So they already were on the streets and they know what it means to make a revolution. But the army is the only, so to say, shield for Lukashenko to remain in power. And this is perhaps the reason why he's been very hesitant to join Putin in his efforts. So this is anyway. So we have like three plus thousand kilometers of common border, and we have been attacked from all the corners. Ukrainian army has been extremely successful and extremely brave in responding. And if you look at the losses of the Russian army these days, they are unseen, they're unprecedented for Russians. Russians have never ever lost so many people and so many equipment, so many weaponry in the most recent wars. So first of all, we have really good army, and they know what they're fighting for. We are on our territory. Second point is that our most recent war has been resumed with Russians, has resumed already in 2014 when they annexed Crimea and invaded the eastern part of Ukraine. And actually, so our army has been in war with Russians all this time. So they are perfectly trained, and again, they're extremely motivated because they know what they're fighting for, and they know very well who they're fighting against. Third point, which is also very important, is that why we are so successful is that our international partners, and thanks to our international partners, US, Europe, Israel, and we have to name a number of them, UK, have been training our people, our army, very good, and they've been trained actually with a clear purpose, just to defend our country and to resist the Russian army. So actually we knew very well that this war will advance sooner or later. We knew that it will happen, and our international partners have been teaching and have been training our troops just to fight against Russians and to kill Russians. And apparently, if you look at the statistics, actually we've been very successful in this regard. And fourth, very important argument why we've been successful is corruption. So what we see that that the Russian army is totally understaffed and totally underfinanced, and this second mightiest and second largest army in the world on the paper has proven to be actually just nothing but just fake. Because if you look at their equipment, if you look at their weaponry, etc., a lot of money has been stolen by Russian officials who were, so to say, supposed to use the funds to, so to say, to bring their army to the best standards. But if you look at the weaponry, if you look at the weapons, if you look at the tanks, if you look at the uniform of Russian soldiers who are lying on the streets in Ukraine, you would say that these guys look like they just arrived from the Second World War. So they are not really equipped for the high standards as it was expected. And he had already mentioned about the life in Ukraine. Yeah, so again, I'm here in the western part of Ukraine. It's more or less safe here. So if you look at the map of Ukraine, we are a huge country from east to west. We are 1,600 kilometers. And here in immediate proximity of Lviv, nothing is happening. However, last days, rockets and missiles have reached Lviv, as I mentioned already. 2 weeks ago, large military base was bombed from, I think, again from Belarus territory or from Crimea. Large military base in just 20 kilometers from Polish border, and about 39 or 40 people were killed and 130 injured. Major tank fuel stations, something like that, were also bombed by Russians here in Lviv, in Rivne, in Dubno, in western part of Ukraine. So obviously they wanted to cut supplies of fuel. Yeah, but the main battles are happening in the eastern part of Ukraine and in the south part of Ukraine. They were trying obviously to get to on the land to Crimea. This is their main purpose, as we understand, because the Crimea is now not reachable for Russians through land, and this is what they were looking for. But so far, they are not exactly successful. Odessa has been protected very well, and there are some other cities in southern part of Ukraine which they were trying to attack, but not really successful. One of their plans was to surround Kiev, and again, they have lost a lot of people. And apparently, what we hear the last news that the Russian troops were dramatically killed, dramatically responded by Ukrainian army most recently. So they were thrown away from Kiev for I don't know how many kilometers. So looks good. I'm so live in Kiev, as I mentioned, and as you see, there is internet connection. It's quite okay. Just 2 days ago, I was in Kiev, back to Kiev. I've been commuting these days and weeks between Kiev and Lviv. It works quite well. So I normally take a train from Lviv to Kiev. The train goes very well. It's a night train. You get on the train in the 11 o'clock in the late afternoon, and normally you would be in Kiev around 7 o'clock in the morning. These days, normally you have like 2 hours delay due to because some railways were destroyed and the train has to avoid them. But this commute goes very well. Normally we go back by car or by bus, taking people or animals from Kiev and evacuating them here to Lviv. It works very well again, and not so many problems anymore. First days we had a number of checkpoints, a lot of checkpoints. Each and every city, each and every town, each and every village had their own checkpoint. And that was the reason also for the queues, for the long drives. But now they settled down. It's much better, and you can actually, last time it took me about 7.5 hours to get from Kiev to Lviv. Not take the central road, but you can still manage it. So in Kiev again, there is internet. The coffee houses, you still can grab nice coffee. Some restaurants are open, and actually a lot of people in uniform, a lot of checkpoints. But generally, you wouldn't see that there is a real war in Kiev. Some buildings were destroyed already. Some rockets have reached, unfortunately, Kiev. Major shopping mall was destroyed just last week because Russians said that there were rocket storage in this shopping mall, actually, just in the middle of a major residential development. But again, Kiev is relatively safe these days, not as in eastern part of Ukraine. Andy has already mentioned the great support of our international partners, and I want to join here because, as I say, so Lviv has been the hub. Lviv these days has been a Lisbon, what Lisbon was in the Second World War, when everybody was, people from Europe were leaving for US. And this is exactly what you see in Lviv. Lviv is just on the corner, on the border with Poland, Slovak Republic. A bit further down, we have Hungary, etc. And all our international partners, all these countries which are on the border with Ukraine in the West, have been extremely generous, have been extremely helpful to help people from Ukraine to cross the border, because I know what it means normally in peaceful times to cross the border by car, or it takes you really a lot of time because, they search you, they check your documents, etc. A lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy. These days is just unbelievable. They've done a huge homework in this regard, and it worked very well. So for instance, I sent my family to Vienna 3 weeks ago. I mean, they were crossing the border on foot, so to say. It took them like 1.5 hours from the moment when I put them here on the Ukrainian part, and they called me already from Poland. Uh, Safe and sound. They were taken on the hand by the volunteers. The volunteers that put them on the train, etc. It's just so good. I'm really thankful to the people of Poland, to people of Romania who have been taking care of our people and have been doing their best just for them to feel very safe and feel very comfortable. So in trains in Europe, for instance, you show the Ukrainian passport and it's complimentary. You can. So my family has taken a train from Poland to Vienna, and they didn't pay a penny for it because you have a Ukrainian passport and it works very well. So it's really, guys, Europe has been extremely united these days, extremely helpful, and I've personally felt this, and I'm personally very, very thankful to all our partners, not only Europe, but also what I hear from Canada now, from US, from all our national partners who have been doing a lot to streamline the entry process for Ukrainians. Today in the morning, Canada has voted for introducing the visa-free entry for Ukrainians, if I'm not mistaken. It's still to be approved by the government, as I understand, but still, it's a huge way forward, and this is really, really very, very good. On the little bit on the legal side, just to accomplish. So I'm professional lawyer. Obviously, I'm managing and founding partner of a major Ukrainian law firm. We are one of the largest operations in Ukraine, and we have 3 offices all over Ukraine: Kiev, Lviv, and Odessa. So these, 3 capitals of Ukraine. In Kiev, we have our office in a very nice, modern skyscraper, and apparently we closed it for obvious reasons because it's a very good target for rockets and missiles. It's situated in the very heart of Kiev, just around the corner from Office of the President of Ukraine, the General Prosecutor Office, etc. So. This is therefore we close it totally. It doesn't work. Odessa is a sort of also very low hanging fruit, and apparently is in the shooting line of Russians. This is why we close it also. And so the only operating office is Lviv these days. What we did, as Andy mentioned already, the American intelligence has been doing a very good job in predicting the invasion, and therefore we were preparing for that. So we were elaborating our plan B for people to evacuate, and what we did, we hired some properties in western part of Ukraine, in Lviv, for our people. And as soon as the invasion has started, the plan started to work, and we managed to evacuate the majority of our people who wanted to be evacuated from Kiev and from Odessa to Lviv or to other parts in western part of Ukraine, or if somebody had relatives, friends, etc. So all our people are safe and sound, as far as I know. As far as I know, all their families, all their properties are safe and sound. They are on the safe side. Some people are still staying here in Lviv. Some people left for Europe. One colleague of mine is now heading to Canada. The majority of our colleagues are in Europe, in Germany, or in Poland. We have created a virtual offices in Poland, where some partners of mine, some colleagues are sort of trying to establish a sort of like, contact office for our purposes, for our clients. Yeah, this is a little bit about what we are doing. So as a law firm, obviously the law firm has dried out. Nobody really needs lawyers these days. I think that our workload these days is perhaps 10% of what we had in our worst times. The questions which have been reaching us from our clients are mostly migration, insolvency, insurance, damages. The main potential workload which we've seen, this is what Andy has mentioned also, the damages. We've been helping our clients to seek damages, to collect evidences. We have 2 big groups of clients: the state-owned companies and public sector and private sector. With private sector, it goes much better. Private sector has been very, very prepared in this regard, and we've been helping our clients to collect evidences for the properties or for the equipment or for the machineries, for factories which were destroyed. Public sector is moving a bit slower here, but the government has been doing a great job in this regard to create a sort of eyewitness program, and it's collecting evidences these days. And I assume that this will be huge amount of work for Ukrainian and international lawyers as soon as the dust has settled and as soon as we have won this war. And on the very pragmatical side, just all the public registers are closed these days. They're about to open it, so you cannot really register some changes in the corporate register, or you cannot move the property, etc. They're about to open it. We hope that it will happen very soon, but so far it's actually frozen. And the government has also introduced very special sanctions against Russians. The state-owned Russian assets are frozen in Ukraine these days, and perhaps the same will also work with regard to the privately held assets of Russians. It's not clear yet, but there are discussions in this regard. So we expect a lot of work in this regard. I mean, we as a major law firm, we actually were not exposed to Russian business at all, even if Russians have always been a huge investor in Ukraine for obvious reasons, actually. But starting from 2014, when Russians have resumed their war against Ukraine, we started to drop the clients from Russia. And actually these days, I think that we have not had any major significant client which would represent, a significant portion of our turnover. We do have some exposure to Russian problem with with our international clients who have been having some JVs with Russians and with Russian state-owned companies, especially in the energy sector. These are the issues, and this is where we are helping our major international clients, including those from US and major energy companies, which have been having JVs in Ukraine with their Russian, so to say, partners. But yeah, this is it. So Russians are not really welcome here anymore, and it looks like the Ukrainian economy will be totally cleansed up after this victory. So this is a little bit about what's going on, and perhaps the last word with regard to the authorities. As Andy mentioned, National Bank of Ukraine has been doing a great job in stabilizing the economy, because you have to know that Ukraine, even if we are sort of very modern country in the middle of Europe, and even if we've been extremely, I mean, the penetration of cashless economy has been very good, but still we are very, very much cash economy. People have been very much reliant on cash, especially those of elder generations. And this is the reason why, as soon as the war has started, as Andy mentioned, you could have seen actually huge lines of people trying to get the cash from ATMs. So National Bank of Ukraine has introduced some special restrictions saying, guys, no problem, but you can withdraw not so much money from the cash machines. And people started to believe in national bank. People started to believe in banking system. And these days, people are, I mean, no cash drain anymore. People use cards all over Ukraine. Again, in eastern part of Ukraine could be a problem. Some retailers say, guys, no problem. For instance, if you go further behind the Kiev, you drive the car, and you would see fuel stations. Normally, you wouldn't get fuel there if you pay by card. But if you pay cash, they would say, okay, there is fuel for you, no problem, we will thank you. But here in the western part of Ukraine, you can pay by card, and it works very well. So National Bank, bravo, has been doing a great job in stabilizing the economy and helping people to trust in the banks. Some other authorities have been totally silent. For instance, Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, they literally closed the offices. They're about to wake up, but all merger control staff, those who know it, merger control has been a sort of a disaster for international clients investing globally. Or in Ukraine, you had to approve the transactions in Ukrainian agency, and the agency is now put everything on hold. So you cannot approve a deal these days. And I think the majority of other state authorities have been very silent. But they are about to wake up, and it looks like the life is about to come back to normal according to the circumstances. So this is it from my side. Happy to answer your questions. Thank you again.
Timur, I must say, for you and Andy, I had for a long time thought that the people in Ukraine were courageous. I'm hearing the story. I'm now finding it's not just courageous, it's impressive how they've adapted to the situation. And so heavens forbid, congratulations for having a great country that knows how to handle a crisis. So the next one we have is Felix Journey. Felix was a student of mine when I was dean of the Bellarmine University School of Business. And out of the hundreds, maybe thousands of MBA students, Felix was one of the most impressive that I ever had. So I was talking to him because he'll have a great story about what he did, where he was. He used to be with the state oil and gas company, Naftogaz, in Ukraine, and then he stayed for several more years with other business. But in a conversation I was having with him as he's setting up a children's relief foundation, he had an observation that I had never considered. So Felix, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Robert. Um, each one of us probably has his or her own favorite book. My favorite book is Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I'm sure most of you have read it. And basically, the main idea of the book is that in our lifetime, we have a couple or one singular, life-changing, catastrophic event, be in the country, in personal life, in the economy. And when we look back at that event, it's kind of, it was predictable, but we did not prepare for that well. And we, at that time, didn't think that might happen. So to me, what happened in Ukraine on February 24th was kind of the Black Swan event. President Biden and the State Department had been warning about it, as Andy said, since December. And I was warning my friends in Kiev. I have about maybe 40, 45 friends, and I sent SMS, emails to them. Guys, this is coming. You have to prepare. You have to buy some canned food, buy some gallons, of water, supplies, buy, a bunch of cans of gasoline, keep your car, full. And nobody was listening to me. Nobody believed it because everybody was saying, no, this is not going to happen. It's very unlikely. This will not happen. My uncle works there. He told me it's not going to happen. My brother-in-law works at the president's office. He said it's not going to happen. So come February 11th, President Biden spoke to me personally. I took it as a U.S. citizen. He told U.S. citizens on February 11th to get out. And he told us you have 48 hours to get out. So what I did, I bought a plane ticket and I got out the next day. And a couple of my American friends and Ukrainian friends, all of my Ukrainian friends for that matter, all of them stayed behind. Nobody listened to me and everybody believed nothing would happen. And unfortunately, February 24th did happen. And most of them were able to get out, but as Andy's friends and some of them are still staying in Kiev, and I'm in contact with them every day, and it's a very sad situation. But what I want to talk about, as Robert said, I spent 2 years in naphtha gas. I know a little bit about energy business, so I want to mix the energy and the geopolitics together, and maybe like the Black Swan book, you'll understand where I'm going. It is clear to us that the West, the civilized world, has decided not to intervene physically in the war in Ukraine against Russia. So the measures that the Western world is taking are primarily focused on sanctions and some small arms supply and some small defensive weapons supply to Ukraine. And in terms of sanctions, the biggest sanctions, of course, are focused on the Russian energy business. And last week, President Biden and European Union agreed to plan to reduce the European dependence on Russian gas by 101 billion cubic meters. And it's fascinating, as Timur was saying, Ukraine has been in war with Russia since 2014. It was clear to me and to most analysts, I think, that Russia would not stop with Donbass and Crimea. But unfortunately, European Union and Germany in particular was still focused on building Nord Stream 2, was still increasing actually supplies of Russian resources to the European Union. And we stand, right before the start of the war, to put it in perspective, 50% of the European gas imports are coming from Russia, 80% of pipeline imports coming from Russia, 45% of coal imports are coming from Russia, and 30% of oil imports to Europe are coming from Russia. And that amounts to, hold your breath, $1 billion per day. As the war goes on, the European Union pays $1 billion every day to the Russians. So just everybody, understands. Why is it significant? And why I don't think that sanctions will not do as much damage as expected. First of all, even before the war started, the European natural gas prices had risen about 4 to 5 times to roughly from $250 to $300 per 1,000 square meters to as of today it stays at $1,500. To put it in perspective, in US the price of gas is 10 times cheaper, $155 today. In Russia it's about $70, and Russia exports to China at about $120. So you see the damage that is being done to the European Union by the Russians. So even if the European Union, as they stated last week, even if they dropped the purchases from Russia by, because the prices had risen already by 5 times, dropping it by half would still bring the Russians 2.5 times revenue, which they had, say, in 2021. At the same time, what we're seeing in Europe right now is as I read the press, one steel mill in Germany already closed 2 weeks ago. The Germans' unions for steel workers and chemical workers warned the government that these gas prices are not sustainable in the short term. I personally talked to some of my friends in Germany and Czech Republic and who are working in the heavy industries. They're saying these gas prices are not sustainable as well. So what we're going to see is the huge economic, regardless of sanctions, actually, Europe is going to experience some difficult times, and a significant reduction in competitiveness and in the economy. And as I talk to my friends, their utility prices for the houses go up every month. They're getting new bills every month. And as we think about it, who is the biggest benefactor? Who benefits the most from the decline of European Union? And one idea to think about it, who did President Putin visit on February 15th, 9 days before the war? Any guess? He visited China, President Xi. And I'm convinced that without China's approval, the war in Ukraine would not have started. My personal belief is that in February 24th has marked the day of the new Cold War and the new Iron Curtain, except this time it doesn't go between the Soviet Union and the West, but it's more like between China and Russia being the proxy of China and the rest of the civilized world. China is the biggest benefactor of all of this. Another point to think about it, as the West imposed the sanctions on Russia, it is clear to the Chinese what would happen to them, what kind of sanctions would be applied to China if China goes and takes Taiwan. So basically, I think the West has opened up the cards and said, okay, look, if Russia invaded Ukraine, here's what we did. No dollar, no euro, no yen, freezing of assets. It basically showed every possible tool at this point. I think there are more tools available, but at this point, it's clear what the West has done to Russia, the West is going to do against China. China is in no rush to do anything. I think they're going to look at the situation, analyze the impact of the sanctions on Russia, and make sure that it's prepared and that it does not fall into the same trap as the Russians did. And in terms of the Black Swan event, which I'm talking about, Everybody talks about China going, and taking Taiwan, and everybody says, no, it's not likely to happen. It's too much dependency, this and that. Ukraine is number 67 trade partner of the United States, $5 billion. We're already experiencing doubling of the gas prices. We're already experiencing, rising food prices. The United States Secretary said that the world is at risk of 1 billion people being, in terms of famine and hunger. And I think the next speaker is going to talk more about that. Taiwan is number 9 trading partner of the United States at $120 billion, so which is like 25 times the volume. And the United States depends heavily on Taiwan for semiconductors, for electronics, you name all of that. So if we're experiencing this turmoil today with the war in Ukraine, imagine what kind of turmoil the world is going to go in when China invades Taiwan. But China is going to invade Taiwan, I think not this year, not next year. I think what the consequences of the war in Ukraine are manifesting, right now in the terms of energy prices, in terms of food prices, and there is talk about, famine and instability in the Middle East again, because, people are heavily dependent on food from Ukraine and Russia. And I think the strategy of China is that, to weaken the West through this turmoil, through high energy prices, and to make sure that the West is focused on our own problems. In the meantime, Putin is going to, destroy as much of Ukraine as possible. $500 billion is the total estimate of damage as of today, and the war has not ended and no end in sight. And we're talking about Marshall Plan and all of that, and I'm sure it will come. But I'm just not convinced that somebody's going to come up with $1 trillion right away and write a check to Ukraine to rebuild.
Hey, Felix, I
yes.
just got the message. We only have 5 minutes left. Omar,
okay, so
is that a drop dead time or?
Okay, all I want to say
we're okay.
is
We can go
from the
beyond
supply
that.
chain perspective, prepare for Taiwan and think about it. If you have a business, if you're reliant on Taiwan, prepare.
So sorry to interrupt. Omar said we're okay, but Felix, the thing that when we were talking before that I was really impressed with your insight was that the intention of Putin was not to occupy, but rather to destroy the Ukraine with as much bombing. And so that will take Ukraine 10 or 20 years to recover.
Right. It will take, like I said, no, I don't believe that somebody's going to cut a check for $1 trillion right away. So it's going to take Ukraine with its own resources some significant amount of time. Okay. So I think that's one of his plans. I don't think he wants to go all the way to Lviv. It's not his objective.
Okay. So by the way, Timur and Andy, just to show how impressed I continue to be with Ukraine, here you are in war conditions and your technology is functioning perfectly. Felix is in the United States, and you can see his technology is not as good as the technology in the Ukraine. So last one is Will Snell is at the University of Kentucky, the College of Agriculture, Food and Environment. And when he saw this program, he says, wow, do you realize how important Ukraine is to food production? So Will, please educate us.
Thank you, Robert. It's I just can't tell you how honored I am to be on this program with what I would say some heroes out there. Just amazing to hear the stories, and as Robert kind of alluded to, I'm an agricultural economist. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if that's good or bad. But I focus a lot on international trade within the ag circles here in the United States and here in our home state of Kentucky. I was actually in D.C. a couple of weeks ago in the Capitol the day that President Zelensky addressed the U.S. Congress. And we had opportunity with my group to talk to our congressional leaders that day, as well as some of the agricultural organizations, the trade commodity organizations in D.C. And, certainly a lot of concern over the human impact on this, and certainly, again, related to food and agriculture. And I guess the way I would describe it, and again, I'm going to be fairly brief given our time constraints, but not only do we have this war going on in the violence and the human element, but it's also what I consider a war on food security. Andy did a great job, and others on the program talking about how important Ukraine is to our world food supply. And it's not only implications within, Ukraine, but around the world. And it has implications, Robert, here in the United States as well as here in our home state of Kentucky. A couple of stats I'll just throw out. If you look at the region of the world being impacted right now, it represents around 30% or more of global grain exports. These two countries, over 30% of the world's grain exports. And another stat that I saw the other day, I haven't been able to verify this, but a couple of speakers I've heard say that it's about 10 to 13% of the world food calories that are being jeopardized by what's going on in that part of the world. So obviously, when you've got that amount of our commodities or food being jeopardized, it is going to have an impact on commodity prices. Agricultural commodity prices were basically soaring before the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, but this has added a new layer of increase in prices. And so it's not only like Andy talked about, the exports being jeopardized by the infrastructure and the ability to get the products to the ports in Ukraine, but also the harvest. We've got the winter wheat crop in Ukraine will be harvested this summer, and there's big uncertainty about how much of that can be harvested. And some of the folks that I work with that watch this from USDA, the Foreign Ag Service, and some of these commodity organizations have individuals around the globe indicating it could be 30 to 50% reduction in agricultural production in 2022 because of this conflict. So again, you've got all this volume of agricultural production and food that is being jeopardized. And as a result, we're seeing lots of increased concerns about global food inflation. We hear a lot about here in the States about, our food prices being up 4 or 5, 7%. And, it's on the news a whole lot. But, in other parts of the world, we're talking about 25, 50% doubling the price of food. And I guess my concern out there, given how important Ukraine is to the world agricultural production as well as the food supply, we're drawing down upon stocks right now. In certain parts of the world, we do have stocks available. And here in the United States, we're very fortunate to have some stocks available. But from my perspective, what happens if we have, we're already seeing right now some of the drought conditions in South America have an impact on global agricultural trade and food supplies. But what happens if we have a bad growing season here in the United States? So, not only do we have this massive food price inflation going around globally right now, but if we're, have a short crop globally this year, outside of we know it's going to impact Ukraine's production, but around the globe, what's that going to do to food prices? We know that here in the States, when prices of food goes up, we all complain about the cost of meat or the cost of a loaf of bread or what have you. But, in other parts of the world where food takes up so much of a higher percentage of individuals' incomes that, not only do you see panic buying, you see increased government corruption, you see food riots, whenever we have limited access to food and food shortages and food price hikes. That's what I have a lot of concern down the road if this war lingers on and we do have some impacts on the overall agricultural supply. A couple of things in closing. There's no doubt that U.S. farmers are benefiting from these higher commodity prices, but at the same time, we're looking at the region of the world that provides a lot of fertilizer, a lot of fuel to U.S. farmers, and that's a concern as our fertilizer prices have increased 2 to 3 times the level that we saw last year. So, again, these higher input prices impact the farmers' cost of production, and therefore, again, add to that food price inflation I mentioned earlier. So, again, a lot of things going on impacting the world food supply. And, hopefully we'll see some resolution of the conflict soon, and we can rebuild some of those supplies out there. But again, and Timur and Felix, the world is looking at Ukraine in terms of being a great agricultural supplier out there. And, ag markets, while, again, we enjoy these higher prices, we don't want to see become because of the conflict. And we need to see more consistency and certainty in these ag markets. And again, at the end of the day, food is a vital component. Obviously, we're all dependent upon our daily intake of food, and hopefully we'll get this conflict behind us and we can get more into a more stable supply and demand, and see these food prices come down in the coming months. So I'll leave it there, Robert, and shift it back to you and Omar. Maybe we'll have some questions related to the impacts on food commodity prices and trade.
Thank you, Will. What we'll do is we'll have 3 questions, and if you don't mind, I guess for Timur and Andy, do you think there will be a split of similar to North Korea, South Korea? And Andy, could you hear my question?
Yes. I think it really now is, what happens next, what happens after we're seeing the peace talks, we're seeing, who's at the table. I think, President Erdogan has taken a driving seat position here in terms of getting people around the table. I think it's really what we are seeing is, Vladimir Putin, his expectation was that Ukraine and that they would capture Kiev within 4 days. Their intelligence was disastrously wrong. I think it just didn't happen. So I think now it's the statements that are being made that they will start pulling back out of Kiev, out of Chernihiv, out of other places. I think now it's really the most important thing is what the security guarantees Ukraine gets in terms of going forwards, because Ukraine was neutral in 2013. It was not aligned to any military alliance, and that's when Russia did invade. That's when it annexed Crimea in 2014 in February, and then further in Donbass. So I do think it's really important now that Ukraine does have the security guarantees from Western countries in order for it not to be invaded again and again by Russia. So I can't see any split in terms of what you're referring to, sort of North Korea or South Korea. But I do think the question will remain: what happens with Crimea? What happens with Donbass? And I think it's just fighting off, and the way the Ukrainian army is fighting off the Russian army, out of its territory at the moment.
I agree very much with what Andy just said. I think that, first of all, the world will look very, very much different after our victory. And I truly believe that we will never see Russia in its today's, so to say, status quo after Ukraine has won this war, and therefore I don't even want to speak about this,
Good.
Southern or Northern Korea, because that was sort of invention of communists, and as soon as Russia has disappeared as Russia, this something like that will totally also disappear, because all this is very much based, all these stories, they're based on this, how to say, generally the story about Ukrainians making pressure on Russians and diminishing Russian language, it was artificially developed by Russians. just to split this Ukrainian society. It has never been the chance. Again, as I mentioned to you, it has never been the case. As I mentioned to you, I was raised in eastern part of Ukraine, in Lugansk. All my relatives are in Russia. And, you know, in my family, I never spoke Ukrainian. And by the way, since from the moment when the war started, my Russian relatives have never called me to check with me if I'm alive, if my family is alive.
Oh,
They have not called me just to check if I'm alive.
wow.
Just an example to you. You know what I mean? So therefore, you know, that's I'm now in Lviv. I have a lot of friends here. You know, I'm happy to speak Russian or Ukrainian. However, I avoid speaking Russian, even if it's my natural language actually. And I last years I've been speaking only Ukrainian actually, starting from this, you know, resumption of the hundreds of years of war in 2014. This is sorry bullshit. Therefore, I don't really believe in that. Ukraine is united as it has never been united before. And just an example, what I mentioned to you, you know, they have destroyed, they have been bombing the originally Russian cities, Mariupol and Kharkiv. They have been killing Russian-speaking kids. All people in Mariupol and Kharkiv, they are just on the border with Russia. All these people, they have relatives, they have friends. They used to work in Russia over the border, and they have been shooting missiles on their kids. What are we talking about? So the country will be as much united as never before. Therefore, I don't really believe in that. Thank you.
No, I actually, Timur, I think that's a wonderful message for us to end with. It's a united country, courageous people, and very impressive in everything that they're doing. So thank you all of you for joining us and helping to educate people around the country and certainly in Kentucky on what it means to be a Ukrainian and what Ukrainian is doing to move forward and be successful. So thank you. Thanks to everybody for hosting us and organizing this. So Omar, you want to say wrap up?
Yes, just final comments here. You know, this has been, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for the speakers for being part of this. It's been a very much an informative session to hear on the ground what's happening, but at the same time to wrap it in terms of a global perspective and its relations to that, and then how it has effect on the local consumer. You know, many of you probably think, you know, why is the World Trade Center hosting an event like this? And the real reason behind it is, you know, global activities in the world constantly affect global trade. And our mission at the World Trade Center is to help Kentucky companies grow trade. And sometimes these conflicts around the world throw hookups in those plans. And we need to be on the cutting edge of understanding how the world commerce moves on a regular basis. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it, and more to come in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I say
Timur.
God bless.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And keep praying for Ukraine. Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you. Cheers.